In this video, I'll be talking about why suffering is the path to awakening. Suffering is the ultimate tool to help you awaken at the deepest levels. In this video, I want to help you understand why this is the truth, why you should follow your suffering. Also want to share with you a model that I recently came up with that will help you understand this on a much deeper level and see why following your pain is the way. Also a quick exercise that you can use to start finding this path for yourself. First of all, I want to talk about why suffering is the path. The first reason I'm going to give you is something that you're probably familiar with, something that you've heard about before, and that is that any type of suffering causes us to want to move away from it. You've probably heard it said that the human being, we always want to move away from pain and towards pleasure. But that impulse to move away from pain or anything that causes distress is more powerful than even the impulse to move towards something pleasurable, right? So anyone who's going through some type of struggle or some suffering or any kind of difficulty, the reason I say this is the path to awakening is because you will almost do anything to break free of that suffering, break free of that pain, right? So it's a natural impulse for us to want to escape pain and suffering. So we look for ways we can do this, and we might find the spiritual path seems to be the most effective way for me to transcend my limitations, for me to transcend my pain. And that's why we're on the journey. And this is important to understand, because without suffering, without trauma, without all the bad stuff that's happened to you and whatever demons you have in your head, you quite simply wouldn't have the motivation to do the work, to do this spiritual work. You wouldn't have it. This is why I say suffering is almost unnecessary. From a higher perspective, we could say God or the universe intentionally create individual suffering in the design of the human being so we can persevere to overcome the suffering and awaken. If we really truly believe that we're all God and we're all trying to realize what we truly are, suffering is the ultimate tool almost to help us find ourselves. If it wasn't for the pain, like I said, we wouldn't do the work. We just wouldn't. Would you? If you were happy and peaceful most of the time, would you even embark on this journey? I'm guessing you wouldn't. So generally speaking, suffering is necessary, helping you. That's the first point I wanted to make. Second point is I want to draw your attention to an image, an illustration that I've kind of came up with. And if you're familiar with another image I use quite a lot, I have these three circles where the inner circle is the self, the middle circle, is the inner world, and the outer circle is the external world. If you're not familiar with that model, I'll link a video up here that'll explain it a bit further. But what I've done is I've taken that model and just kind of zoomed in to a section of it. So this is how I want you to see this model. So we've got self there, inner world, outer world. We've got this line. So in green, I'm going to explain to you what each section of this diagram means. If you're familiar with the other model, we know self is what you are at your core, the true self. This outer line shows the outer world. We could even call it external reality. I can't quite fit in my words there, but imagine this is the outside world, okay? This line we call your inner world. So that includes thoughts, emotions, feelings, everything you experience through your senses, everything that you experience inside your body, or at least that's what it feels like. So this is what our experience is made up of, what's going on inside me and what I perceive outside of me, okay? This green line is showing you physical matter and pure energy. So on this end of this green line, this spectrum, we've got matter. Maybe spell that wrong. Matter, solid. So this is where reality appears to be solid, made of stuff, right? Physical reality, everything's solid. The frequency of energy on this level is very low. As we move along this scale closer and closer to the self, The energy on this end is pure energy, a very subtle energy. In fact, the closer we get to the self, the energy becomes more and more subtle, okay? And the frequency is much, much higher. So imagine that this is your whole psyche. Everything you experience is here. Any type of suffering you have, imagine it's like a spear. I call this the suffering spear. I don't know why, just because they both begin with the letter S. The suffering spear, right? And this is like wedged in your psyche, right? And it influences you, influences everything you see and experience, because it's right there, right in the middle of your consciousness. It's in your inner world, it's in your outer world. Whatever that trauma is, whatever that suffering, whatever that thing you're trying to overcome, it's literally in your psyche. And the deeper we go into here, we're going into subconscious territories. I'll put subconscious there. Unconscious, collective aspects of our mind. And a lot of our suffering can go quite deep. Now, the deeper your suffering, the greater your chance for awakening. Or should I say, the deeper your suffering, the greater your awakening, the deeper your awakening. And I want to help you to understand why this is true. Now, if this suffering spear is a result of some very deep trauma you had, then the trauma goes into your subconscious, unconscious, and even into your collective unconscious, very, very deep. In order for you to transcend your suffering, you're going to have to get before it. You have to find the space before that suffering even exists. Because everything you are experiencing in life is literally, you're creating it from the true self. From the self. All your physical reality, all your thoughts, all your feelings, everything is created from the self. So if we can find a way to become before my suffering, if we can find the space that is there prior to it, then we can free ourselves from it. Because everything that is before it is nothing to do with it. When you find it here and you become pure consciousness, then you can change everything else here. I mean, the depth here, this never ends. Can you ever reach the self? I think this inward journey is infinite. It never actually ends. However, we can get to a point where we are before our suffering and we can find that space. And that's the final part of the video. I just want to share with you how you can find that space that exists prior to your trauma, that exists prior to your suffering. When you can find that space, you will understand that you are actually keeping your suffering alive. So how do we find the space? So I made a video recently called Connecting to Stillness. And what I can say about this space that is prior to our suffering, it's a sense of stillness. It's a stillness that has a great depth. It's a stillness that has an unlimited depth. But the easiest way to find it is start finding that stillness that is deep within you. Okay? It's there. You can find it in deep meditation. Once you can start to tap into that deep stillness and start to experience it throughout life, when you're doing things, you're working, taking it with you wherever you go, or whoever you're around, you're always connected to that stillness, then you're starting to find that depth. It's a very, very subtle level of consciousness. Like I said, the deeper and closer we get to the self, the more subtle the frequency and the energy becomes, but the stillness is the clue. And the final step of this process is that when you're dialing in, or when you've dialed into that stillness and you're starting to connect to it, you want to start to find triggering events. You want to start to do things that create fear in you, and then you want to start connecting to the stillness. Take your stillness into them situations where you're really feeling traumatized or triggered or anxious or whatever your trauma or suffering is. And this is why I say suffering is the key, because when you begin to find that space, even when you're experiencing this suffering that's wedged in your psyche, in your mind, and you're finding that space behind it, you're going to start to take that everywhere you go, because for most people, the suffering is what really takes over their mind, hijacks their emotions. But as you begin to find that stillness that exists prior to it, your integration, your development is going to just evolve very, very quickly, accelerate almost. So your suffering is necessary. The deeper you're suffering, the deeper you're awakening. You just have to use it, follow it, find the place, the stillness that exists before it. I know this is a bit counterintuitive because we usually talk about transcending. I'm actually telling you to find that place that comes before it. And this illustration is really the best way I can illustrate that. Is like, here, you need to find this space. Stillness. Find that stillness. Take that stillness everywhere you go. That'll help you transcend your suffering. But follow your suffering all the way to the stillness. Okay, I hope that makes sense. That is everything I have to talk about in a video. If you did enjoy it, if you could please go ahead, give it a like, comment, share, subscribe. It really helps me out. If you haven't already, remember to check out my book. I'll put a link in the description. But until next time, remember to keep living free and being free. Peace.